When it comes to food, Americans do things a bit differently than our neighbors across the pond. This week, we explore some of our favorite food phenomenons. You're watching Cheddar's Who Knew? I'm Hannah Ostapchuk. Unlike candy or cereal, we assume that the color of our natural foods are a result of the environment. But some aren't actually the color we assume at all. That's because the government actually plays a key role in determining the colors of our food. Here's why.
When walking through a grocery store, we expect food to be certain colors. Oranges are orange, salmon is pink, and pickles are yellowish green. But what if I told you that this isn't necessarily true? Unlike candy or cereal, we assume that the color of natural foods are a result of the environment. But some aren't actually the color we assume. That's because the government plays a key role in determining the colors of your food. And for that, we can thank the margarine wars of the late 19th century. In the 1860s, butter was expensive. Without refrigeration, the product spoiled quickly. In response, the French invented a cheaper alternative called margarine. It was made by churning beef tallow, a form of animal fat, with salt and milk. Margarine was a similar tasting spread, but was less expensive and took longer to spoil. But unlike butter, margarine was white, the color of lard. So, manufacturers added a yellow dye in order to appeal to consumers' palates conditioned by the color of butter. By the 1870s, margarine was flying off American shelves. Meanwhile, butter sales were falling. So the American dairy industry launched a propaganda campaign against margarine. The campaign published articles citing the use of dangerous ingredients and used obscene cartoons depicting the wretched conditions of factories. In 1886, the government passed the Oleomargarine Act to appease butter manufacturers. It permitted the coloring of margarine, but aimed to restrict sales by adding a 2-cent tax per pound whether it was colored or not. The act marked one of the first instances in which an industry pursued government intervention in an effort to stop competition. But this wasn't enough for dairy farmers, and they continued to seek government legislation. By the end of the century, 26 states had enacted anti-color laws that completely prohibited the coloring of margarine. Some states went as far as making manufacturers dye margarine pink so that consumers could discern the difference in products. In 1902, the federal government took it a step further and added a 10-cent tax on artificially dyed margarine, while the tax on naturally colored was reduced to a quarter of a cent. In order to avoid the tax, margarine producers started using vegetable oil as a natural dye and even sold color capsules along with the white margarine so that consumers could color it at home. The margarine wars were coming to a close, but the war on food dye was just beginning. In 1906, the Food and Drugs Act banned the use of harmful coloring without labeling to conceal damage or inferiority. The government certified 7 colors for food use, not only because they were considered harmless, but because they were heavily used. However, the use of them was not required. Manufacturers could still use uncertified colors as long as they were labeled in the ingredients. And American consumers still bought them.
If we didn't use coloring, our food products would look a lot different than they look. It may affect people's decision whether to buy a food product or not. But in addition to that, colors can also be used as a way to enhance flavoring or more importantly, to enhance freshness.
What we see on our plate determines how we taste. During one study by the British researcher J.C. Wheatley in the 1970s, participants ate steak and fries in a dark room. Subjects stated the food tasted normal, but midway through the meal, scientists turned on the lights to reveal that the steak was dyed blue and the fries green. many participants became ill or lost their appetite merely at the sight. The experiment showed how our brains can alter the taste of food depending on our perception of color. In the early 1900s, the USDA began setting grade standards for the external appearances of certain foods. For example, no more than 4% of peas in a can of canned peas could be discolored. And in order for apples to be graded as US extra fancy, they must be colored 50% striped or partially red. These grading standards determine the quality of food based solely on appearance. But throughout this time, journalists continued to uncover more harmful properties associated with dyes and ingredients used in food, drug, and cosmetic products. Then, in 1937, disaster struck. A Tennessee drug company began advertising the benefits of a new drug to treat infections. But the product was untested and was found to have toxic ingredients after over 100 patients died. The newly created FDA quickly enacted the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, and unlike the 1906 law, only the use of certified dyes would be permitted by law. Regulations continued to strengthen, and the list of certified colors was frequently updated due to safety concerns.
There are 9 certified colors that are approved for use in the United States. And the FDA has a chart with those 9 colors.
And these colors are prominent across the food industry, even in foods you may not expect. When you think about the color of typical pickles in a jar, you probably picture a bright yellow-green color like these. Although pickles are naturally green, this bright hue is the result of food dye. Yellow dye number 5 and 6. This dye keeps skin from fading while on shelves. Uncolored pickles, on the other hand, are much less vibrant and look like this. Now, what color do you think of when it comes to oranges? Obviously the color orange, right? But that isn't always the case. In warmer climates, ripe oranges are actually green. And many residents of equatorial communities have never even seen an orange in food stands. Only in cooler temperatures does this green pigment die off, revealing an orange color. However, consumers in these areas associate green with an unripe fruit. So, in order to make oranges sellable in the US and European market, farmers in warmer states like Florida, where 70% of the US citrus supply comes from, and Texas, often artificially dye them orange. However, the dye is banned in California and Arizona. Salmon is another unsuspecting food that relies on dyes to make sales. Unlike wild salmon that is naturally pink, farm-raised salmon is naturally gray. The meat from wild salmon is pink because their diet consists of naturally pigmenting compounds from krill and shrimp. But farmed salmon are fed food pellets with astaxanthin, an FDA-approved dye, in order to turn them pink. This is because consumers have been shown to prefer darker shades of pink and will pay up to $1 more per pound for a darker color compared to lighter hues.
Fish is a huge problem when it comes to deception. You've got fish that's caught in Alaska, for example, sent to Asia for manipulation, sent back to Alaska, and then sent to the States for consumption in sushi bars.
Some wheat breads, cheeses, and others contain dyes as well.
By regulating this kind of food coloring or the use of food dyes, government is trying to protect people's health by stopping the introduction of harmful substances. But at the same time, this kind of regulation was adjusted so that this regulation does not affect the food industry in a devastating way. They don't want to ban or prohibit all of the synthetic dyes or prohibit the entire food coloring process.
Today, some companies are experimenting by slowly removing synthetic dyes from foods. Instead, they're moving towards the less vibrant, natural dyes. For example, Subway recently stated it would stop using artificial dye to color banana peppers and use turmeric to maintain the bright yellow appearance instead. And Panera Bread removed the use of dye in its mozzarella cheese, which turned it from having a bright white color to a yellowish hue.
The standard the government uses is a reasonable standard. So they don't have to be foolproof, 100% proven safe, but they have to be shown to be reasonably safe. So we allow these little exceptions to the 100% rule, no risk rule, in order to accommodate a modern food system of having foods that are manufactured in different colors and taste and a variety of foods. But the problem with that is, beyond just the questions of deception and safety, is the question of, is this the kind of food system we want?
Food coloring aside, American taste buds are also unique. A Hershey's chocolate bar might be a sweet treat for us, but sour for Europeans. And there's actually a scientific reason for it. So why do Europeans think our chocolate is disgusting?
While us Americans are mindlessly chomping away at our Hershey's bars, some of our friends across the pond are kinda disgusted by what we're eating, even though it tastes good to us. They've said American chocolate tastes like vomit and earwax, called it sour and bitter.
In some parts, it's a matter of taste, yes. But actually, there's a scientific reason why Europeans think our chocolate tastes so bad. First, we have to do some debunking.
If you look at the nutrition labels of a European Cadbury bar and an American Hershey bar, this is what you'll see. All the ingredients listed by net weight. You may note that in the Hershey's bar, the first ingredient is sugar, but in the Cadbury bar, the first ingredient is milk. So you might think, bingo, there's the reason some Europeans say American chocolate is sickly sweet. But actually, you'd be wrong. In the US, milk is weighed in its evaporated, powdered state, while in the UK, it's weighed as a liquid. So actually, they're pretty much the same. The other main difference is that they use different emulsifiers, which smooth the chocolate. Hershey's uses soy lecithin and PGPR, while Cadbury uses E442 and E476. Again, this seems like a big difference. But actually, E476 is just the European name for PGPR. Wow, that's a mouthful. Another common argument you might hear is that there's a different amount of cocoa in American versus European bars. The US has a requirement for 10%, while EU law dictates that it must be at least 30% cocoa. US law says that 10% can only be cocoa powder, but the EU's 30% contains cocoa solids, aka both cocoa powder and cocoa butter. So again, they end up being pretty much the same.
You might be starting to think that this is hopeless. They're practically the same chocolate.
But these theories are focusing on the wrong ingredients. Let's now shift our attention to the most important ingredient, Milton Hershey. It was 1894 when 37-year-old candy manufacturer Milton Hershey decided to produce sweet chocolate as a coating for his caramels. It was a novel concept for the day, considering that milk chocolate was a rare treat for the rich and famous. Before this time, the intensive production process just wasn't possible on a large scale. But Hershey found inspiration from Henry Ford's production line and decided to apply that process to chocolate. It was a smashing success, and their flagship factory in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, became the Hershey Chocolate Company. In 1900, the company began producing milk chocolate in bars, wafers, and other shapes. With mass production, Hershey was able to lower the per-unit cost and make milk chocolate for cheap. Hershey had been competing with other chocolate companies to have the cheapest chocolate bar in stores, and therefore the most accessible. Being a savvy businessman, he knew that increasing the quality or flavor would result in slim profit margins. So he decided to focus on the back end, aka the accumulation of ingredients. After he fine-tuned his cacao, he decided to focus on the next most important ingredient in a chocolate bar, the milk. And at the time, the early 1900s, fresh milk could not be legally stored for longer than 72 hours. That put a real cramp in Hershey's style, considering that after 72 hours, any unused milk had to be thrown out. And having fresh milk in chocolate meant that it couldn't be stored as long, even in bar form. So Hershey developed a process to do something to the milk in 1930. It's actually still a trade secret to this day, but experts speculate that he created a secret process to alter the milk. It kept the milk fresh past 72 hours. It gave Hershey the edge to make the cheapest and most widely accessible milk chocolate.
But that process had an unexpected effect on the chocolate itself.
The secret method is known today as lipolysis. In lipolysis, enzymes introduced to milk break down fatty globules into smaller, more stable fat molecules. In order to kickstart this process, you first need butyric acid. It's a compound that partially sours the milk, but does give it greater shelf life. The resulting flavor is instantly recognizable. It's also found in Parmesan cheese and vomit. And particularly high quantities of it are found in baby's vomit. It's sour and bitter, sometimes in a good way, like pungent cheeses, and sometimes in a bad way, obviously. It was first discovered in 1814 by French scientist Michael Chevrel, who was interested in finding the chemical responsible for the smell of butter that had gone bad. It's also the chemical responsible for that wet dog farmyard smell. It's secreted from dogs' anal glands, so try not to think of that next time you eat a Hershey's Kiss.
But don't worry, the butyric acid in chocolate is from milk.
Today, European chocolates are preserved for similar amounts of time by using different chemical preservatives and specially sealed plastic packaging. But Cadbury still recommends that their milk chocolate is consumed within a year of it being produced. So does Hershey, so by now they're pretty similar. Lipolysis allowed Hershey's chocolate to take a resounding lead in the American chocolate wars. But World War II is what caused the taste of this chocolate to conquer American palates. During the war, Hershey's chocolate scored a coveted contract to make military D rations for the American Army. By 1945, Hershey was producing around 24 million bars a week for soldiers. These bars were a staple in the diets of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers away at war. They were so beloved that Hershey was awarded 5 Army-Navy E-Production Awards. In contrast, Cadbury, Hershey's biggest European competitor, offered up its factory to make airplane parts and manufacture wartime supplies. They didn't manufacture any food at all, and in fact, in Britain, chocolate was rationed.
This allowed Hershey to establish a taste monopoly. Almost every American soldier came home wanting chocolate that tasted the same as the one they'd been eating for years.
Since all of the bars that Hershey made for the government used this top-secret milk stabilization method, soldiers got used to the unique taste. In fact, they got so used to it that it became their new normal. Because of the wild popularity of Hershey's post-World War II, other chocolate companies in the US added butyric acid to their chocolate to mimic the flavor of Hershey's that all the soldiers absolutely loved. It became a staple of American commercial chocolate.
If you're in the US, like me, you probably don't even notice it when you're chowing down on that chocolate bar from CVS.
Today, lipolysis isn't necessary due to chemical advancements in food chemistry. Hershey still does it because the taste is what all of us know and love. Some smaller independent chocolate brands have stopped adding butyric acid to their chocolate in favor of marketing it as similar to European chocolates. With trends moving towards an appreciation of organic, pure foods, Hershey may not be at the top of the chocolate world much longer. But it's hard to beat their super cheap, super accessible chocolate, so don't expect it to go away anytime soon. But Europeans certainly notice, since none of their chocolate companies use the lipolysis method or supplement their chocolate.
So on behalf of Americans, I am very sorry that our chocolate tastes terrible to you. But it's not our fault.
Well, that concludes this week's Who Knew? I'm Hannah Ostapchuk. Thanks for watching.